Morning, everybody. Morning, my friends in Mauritius and also the rest of Africa. Hope things are going well for you, despite a number of bad news, about second wave coming, but hopefully things are going well in your respective countries. I've got a fantastic lady this morning, Shireen Ghengadu, with me. Morning, Shireen.
Good morning, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
You're currently in Joburg. So how are things currently in Joburg? I understand that there's been a redefined stage 3 in respect to lockdown as of yesterday.
Quite correct, because our numbers are spiking horrendously at the moment. In Gauteng in particular, which is where I'm based, we on lockdown 106 or days 6 or 7, and essentially we bought some time to get prepared for this onslaught, but July and August are going to be our defining moments. And yes, we are in lockdown level 3, redefined rules, and the big game changer is alcohol has been banned once again. Of course, that has created a whole lot of drama around the banning.
So I guess a lot of people must have stocked up on Sunday, just before the banning of alcohol. Shireen, great to have you. Just for my viewers, for the viewers here, you are the founder CEO of Roots Advisory. So you've got your own advisory firm. You consult a lot of corporates, and also you speak a lot at conferences as well. And also not only South Africa, also the only thing is the last couple of months, no more flying, but then you've been very busy on webinars, as well. So probably that's the new norm, instead of sort of flying and going to conferences. Shireen, you've got a fantastic title for today, which is about women leadership and the shadow pandemics in this new normal. Women, obviously, talks currently about women leaders leading key countries like New Zealand, Germany, Nordic countries, etc. And there's been lots of comparisons between women leadership and male leadership. And here, I'm thinking about Boris Johnson, Trump, amongst a few, Bolsonaro, for example. Shireen, would love to hear from you. You've got a presentation. We'll come back with a Q&A afterwards. And I'm keen to understand what the shadow pandemics is all about, Shireen. So it's all yours,
Thank you, Kevin. Just one correction. You said CEO and founder of Roots Advisory. It's actually Chengadu Advisory, as you will see on the screen, but that's okay, because Roots Advisory is a good friend.
Indeed, indeed.
Yes. So I'll start with that, and essentially I want to start with why I pointed out Chengadu Advisory, because as women leaders, we often shy away from our authenticity and who we are. And I remember when I launched this business, people, the big 4 accounting and advisory firms said to me, because I do some work with them, they said, but that's very brave. Why choose a name like Chengadu Advisory, your name? And I said, your name is everything. And what my name stands for and the values it stands for is critically important. So I thought I'll just start with that little story of my name. Of course, this the last almost 4 months has been critical in terms of leadership, whether it is business, government, societal leadership. But in this time of leading, we've come across fabulous examples of conviction leaders, and we've come across examples of how not to lead. And then at the same time, the Covid-19 pandemic has shown up shadow pandemics. And these have mostly affected women. And we'll go through that and talk about it a little bit. But first, because we've all been rushing around and our lives have been essentially turned inside out, tilted, and we've all gone through life through such an incredible uncertainty and volatility in the last months, one of the crucial things I'm doing as I work through with my clients, my executive lectures, whether it is local, global, is just saying, take a moment to breathe. Take a moment to take a deep breath and be aware of the breath. so that we can be in the present. Because otherwise we're running so hard, we're so terrified, we're getting inundated by the consumption of news from all sorts of sources. It's just about taking a moment to center yourself, and mindful breathing can do that. And this brings me to the changing face of leadership. And leadership requires mindfulness, leadership requires presence, and leadership does not require a formal position anymore. When I think of Greta Thunberg at this year's World Economic Forum, just before the pandemic hit and became this global pause on the whole world, when a young girl like Greta Thunberg stands up and takes on the world leaders, that is the changing face of leadership. And young women, young girls, young people around the world are saying, we have a voice, and we will use our voice so that it becomes the force for good and for change. Here's an example of Greta, too young to vote, no money to invest, no formal power to alter the course of global markets. But what she does have is a powerful voice, and she will use that voice. And it's a beautiful way to say, this is what leadership is about. This is what's required of every one of us who leads from any chair, any table, every day. We don't need a formal position to be leading. And in this time of the COVID-19, we've seen phenomenal leaders from business, government, society take on that mantle of leadership without the formal role. But in terms of formal leadership roles, let's talk about the heads of state that have done phenomenally well in comparison to their male counterparts. And you've started off talking about the case of Brazil, the US, the UK. And we've seen examples of leaders like these that are on your screen right now, who've been phenomenal. Yes, you may argue the numbers in Germany were high. But the way in which it was handled, the decisiveness, is what created the game changer. It is what reduced the number of deaths compared to male counterparts in other parts of the world. So the face of leadership is changing. In Finland, 34 years old, prime minister. So again, it's not about age. It is not about the gray hair and, oh, I've done this and I've got the scars. It's about a different face of leadership. And I watched with fascination a wonderful interview with Fareed Zakaria and Madeleine Albright on CNN not long ago. And they were talking about the key lessons on leadership and what has this COVID-19 taught us. And one of the key distinguishing factors that Madeleine Albright referred to, or a few distinguishing factors about women leaders, heads of state in this time, is that A, they have the ability to multitask. They have solid experience and they have peripheral vision. Now take any mother. A mother can be busy working, but the peripheral vision of what's going on around her and it affects the well-being of her family is absolutely sharp. Also, what Madeleine Albright said was that women leaders demonstrated decisive behavior. And we've seen this with Jacinda Ardern, taking very, very clear, distinctive, convicted decisions. For example, in 2019, when there was that mass horrendous shooting in the mosques in New Zealand, she took decisive action. Take that story off the media, the mainstream media, a day after it happened. She came in with absolute conviction around gun laws. And yet you may look at the US and go, why are these horrendous things still happening? It may be an indication of the lack of decisiveness, clear communication. These women leaders demonstrated a clear communication strategy, no baffling and confusing and causing chaos in their countries. The other one was that this ability to listen to experts. Let's take the case of Trump. I mean, now he's having a go at Fauci. First, it was the World Health Organization. Then it was China. Then it was Dr. Fauci, who dares to stand up and say what he knows from a data-driven point of view. And so there's these women leaders who've demonstrated this ability to listen to experts, take guidance from experts, cooperative and collaborative, less authoritarianism. It's less about the ego and more about the ecosystem. What's in the best interest of my people? Madeleine Albright said she used this example of when she was little and the World War, the Second World War, she said, and her parents told her about the bombs, and the one lesson she said she learned at her parents from her parents was that they couldn't control the bombs like we can't control COVID-19, but the only thing we can control is our own behavior, whether it's in the work, whether it's in our homes, whether it's in society, whether it is in leading a country. The other traits are resiliency, humility, and optimism for a brighter future. The beautiful thing of Jacinda Ardern saying to the kids in April in New Zealand, the Easter Bunny, we're going to make an exception and Bunny's going to come to you, but in a safe way. Now that is creating optimism, and that's what a good leader does. So is it time to embrace feminine values that can solve our toughest problems and build a more prosperous future? And this is not coming just from me, but the indication is that we are now moving to change our perception of what leadership looks like. The very values that we didn't hold in high regard before are the ones we're looking for now, especially in times of crisis. And we may even say in the times of crisis, the acid test of leadership is more stark. So Gazima and Antonio in 2013 wrote about the Athena doctrine, in which they said the feminine values, women and men like them, who will rule the now and the future. And that in this COVID-19, it's raised a number of shadow pandemics. So 2020 marks the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, which is where we, countries, global network and collaboration around gender equality. And this was supposed to be a groundbreaking year for gender equality. But sadly, this pandemic has raised deepening pre-existing inequalities. And this has exposed huge vulnerabilities, socially, politically, and economically. And we've seen this amplified in the last 4 months. So why may COVID-19 be worse for women than men? And these are some of the things that have come up in multiple sources around the world, not just in South Africa or in Mauritius, but around the world. That one, the health risks associated for women is far higher because women comprise the majority of health and social care workers. In other words, they're at the front lines of fighting COVID-19. Just look at hospitals, look at the number of nurses, look at the number of social services workers. These individuals are mostly women, and they're serving at the front lines. The economic risks. Look at business owners or women employed in sectors most affected by COVID-19. Think about the beauty industry. Think about hospitality and spas and guest houses, Airbnbs. Mostly, women are affected, as is education. Most of the women are teachers. And now the risk and economic risks attached to it is amplified because they have not been able to attract an income. In addition to which, why this may be worse for women is that during mass school closures around the world, women have been particularly affected because they still hold the majority of responsibility for childcare. We may even argue this point that yes, men and women are in lockdown and men are sharing the responsibility. I do not deny that at all. but women still carry the majority of responsibility.
Thanks, Shireen. Great presentation. My first question to you is, I mean, if you look over the last, women leadership and also women in society, generally speaking, it's only very recently that even in the first world, women got the right to vote, a couple of decades ago, for example, and then even women getting into work, etc., being super active in work and going up the career ladder. Do you think we need in the corporate world, for example, you deal a lot with corporate clients, yeah? Do you think we need to put in quotas in terms of enforcing women representation on boards, for example, or even in top management, as an example?
Yeah, Kevin, quotas, it's a double-edged sword, because it may become the target. Look, for example, the 30% club around the world, around the number of women on boards. The assumption then becomes, we just need 30%. But that's not equality. Yes, it may start to give us more women around the boards. That is the one danger of having quotas. And the second biggest danger is that it is not done for true inclusion. It is done as a compliance issue about a tick box exercise. We need an X number of women because we are compelled, or our policies and practices, or we've signed the Global Compact, or the Women Empowerment Principles Compact, and that requires us to have an X number of women around the boards. In my view, that is an erroneous start point. And that is where I'm finding this big dilemma that happens in corporates around numbers versus inclusion. So diversity in terms of numbers we may have, but we may not have women who are truly belonging at those tables of power. So at the seats of power, whether it's a boardroom, exco, I think quotas can be limiting. Kevin, are you there?
Sorry, you didn't hear me. I was saying, where do you see South Africa as an example? If you look at women in leadership position, how much progress do you think has been made to date?
Look, we've made significant progress. We have at least 60% of our university graduates are women. So we have critical mass coming into the workplace. But we've made good progress up to middle management. And that's where women appear to be getting stuck in the belly of the organizations. We still don't have enough women representation as chairs of boards or as CEOs. The number is around 16% board representation and about 5% CEO representation in South Africa. And that's not unique. When we did the interviews for those book, Women Leadership in Emerging Markets, in all the emerging markets, that is mirrored around the world. Very few countries are getting it right, the Scandinavian countries in particular, because it's more than quotas. And that is why I was saying about quotas. People are being held to account. So yes, across the world and including in South Africa, there's very good intentions. Corporates are putting good money into trying to fix the situation of becoming more representational. But the concrete actions don't match those good intentions. And there's the problem. So yes, in South Africa, we're making progress. It's been driven at a policy level. Our government is representative. We have 50% representation in terms of numbers, but that does not mean inclusion.
It doesn't mean it's being enforced, yeah? So the glass ceiling is still seems to be there.
And women are stuck in the belly of the organizations, or borrowing from that beautiful movie Hidden Figures. They are the hidden figures who are doing the work behind the scenes, but their stories are never told. They are not getting the recognition they deserve because they remain in the belly of the organization in general.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, interestingly, in one of your slides, I mean, you talked about, for example, in this lockdown and the COVID period, basically, you've talked about the frontliners, which is a very relevant point. Most of the frontliners are actually women, whether you go to supermarkets, you go to hospitals, etc. And yet, it's something which hasn't been put forward as, if you remember 100 years ago when you had wars, men used to go to war and they were publicized, and this war, which we're currently fighting against the virus, women, we don't hear much, and it's a very relevant point that you've brought up. Sure.
Yeah, because they remain, as we said, the unknown, invisible faces. Their stories, look at women, and I'm not saying it's been done exclusively by women, but look at the women in their communities, how they've rallied around to families that have less than they have. They have so little, but they've rallied around to ensure that the people in their communities have food to eat during this time, because we know the numbers of unemployment, but no one's telling those stories. We only tell the stories of the popular things that the press wants to hear. We're not telling enough of the stories of the ordinary women who are doing extraordinary work under anything but ordinary circumstances.
And if you look at going back again to South Africa, because that's the market where you're far more present in that market. South Africa is an emerging market at the end of the day, but then it ranks much higher than most, if not all, African countries in number of respects. But when you look at women leadership, what do you believe tangibly can and should be done to get women more visible? I know you've talked about there are laws, but then it seems to me it's the enforcement. Now, enforcing, does it mean it's a generation issue, i.e. maybe 10 years from now, the younger generation that might be in leadership position might be more open to basically a 50-50 or even more than 50-50, why not? And you've taken a couple of examples being the Nordic countries. It's a cultural difference, and then also it's probably synonymous to how developed a country might be potentially, even though somebody might say, yeah, but that's not the case in the US. There's never been a female leader at the presidency, for example. What are your thoughts about this here in, for example, South Africa?
So I think it's threefold. One is the policy level, but it's one thing having fabulous policies, but as you rightfully pointed out, if someone's feet are not held to the fire and people are not being held to account, we will have good intentions, but there won't be results. So that's number one. So I think enforcement, for example, let's take listing on the stock exchange. If you are not measuring and monitoring and evaluating and measuring and reporting accurately, you cannot be part of the stock exchange. You cannot be listed on the stock exchange. I'm just giving you one example. The second thing is corporates need to be held account. So at the meso level, the first was the macro level. At the meso level, corporates who are not being held, who are not responding in a favorable way, if they're doing it as a tick box exercise, they need to be held account. And it has to be the board and the leadership of those entities that need to be held to account. Right now, somebody is saying, okay, we need to bring in X number of women because we short on women. But they're not looking at the intersectionality, that women are not one homogeneous group. Women, there's a intersectionality and simultaneity happening between race, gender, class, age, sexual identity, religion, ethnicity. So we can't just have one blank slate and say, oh, it's just about gender equality in terms of numbers. So we need to have a proper plan. We need to make sure that the plan is monitored and evaluated, And if we miss the mark, let's say 2 consecutive years, in terms of creating the pipeline of women leaders all the way to the top, then the leadership needs to be held to account. Try cutting, good perks and bonuses if you don't meet your target. That should be a good game changer. And this third one is about the women themselves. And it's about women taking responsibility for their own careers and no longer having to apologize for being ambitious, for taking their rightful places, putting their hands up and saying, I want that job. Tell me why I don't qualify, why you say I don't meet those criteria. And if I don't, tell me what I need to do so that I'm ready for it in the next round of promotions or assignments or projects that may come up. Women need to be in the P&L responsibilities and functions in the business. Otherwise, if they are the support systems, they're never going to rise through their career. And lastly, this generation of women, and we've seen this around the world, are not, and that's why I started with Greta Thunberg, are not going to sit back and go, bring it unto me. I'm going to take it up. This is the time in which women around the world, all age groups, are saying, we have a voice. We are going to use this voice, whether it's in our countries. We've seen protest actions around the world. You may remember when Trump was installed as the president, and straight after his inauguration, the next day, the biggest mass gatherings around the world of women and supported by men. Let's make no mistake about it, that it's about working together so that we can create the change. But young women in general are saying, we're not going to step back and let you do unto us. We're going to take control, and you're going to hear our voices. Look here in South Africa, in 1956, 20,000 women. We didn't have cell phones, we didn't have emails, we didn't have social media, but 20,000 women came together from all walks of life, from the villages and the suburbs, the voters and the voteless, the voiced and the voiceless, came together and marched to the union buildings to say, we demand an end to the past laws. It has been done before. The suffragette movement that you referred to years ago, the unbanning not unbanning, my apologies, women being allowed to drive for the very first time in Saudi Arabia 2 years ago. So there's still big work to be done, but women are taking charge. They're breaking the barriers for themselves. And I love the words of Tyler Perry. I was watching I think it was the BET Awards, and he was saying, if there's no place for you at the table, create your own table. I love that, because women can become business owners and they can create the jobs. And Lord knows we need job creation, because all around the world, jobs are at our all-time low.
Absolutely. A very good point you made. And I was thinking, like, probably what's going to help in getting that transition. A, you've talked about age, generation, and then B, technology, because with technology today, you get to see what's happening in the world, be it whether you live in a city or in a village. A lot of people are connected, and as more and more people get connected, they get to know that basically somebody who's in South Africa or the rest of Africa can see, who's the Prime Minister of New Zealand, or, who's that 34-year-old leader in Finland, for example. Yeah. So hopefully technology will disseminate information to demonstrate that women are natural leaders in a way, and there shouldn't be any difference between sort of men and women. So hopefully technology is going to help us in breaking that sort of ceiling eventually. That's the positive side of technology, I would assume. You've talked about, there's one point you talked about, I think there was your second slide was about redefining leadership. And you said, obviously, we've talked about gender, then you've talked about age, because traditionally it used to be, and it still is, by the way, for example, in Mauritius, to be a politician or leadership in the corporate world, or to be a board member you need to have that gray hair. And very often it's like you need to be 60 plus, you know. What are you seeing there? You know, how's that sort of age going to play in that sort of over the next 5 or 10 years? Do you see that 10 years from now, people are not going to bother about age?
Yeah, I think, look, you talked about technology. That is going to be one of the great levelers. But age is not going to be the factor that we traditionally looked at leadership, because we've seen the perfect examples around the world. And I don't say perfect in the sense that they're not flawed, but we've seen how young people have greater appetite for risk, and they're prepared to take considered decisions around the things that affect not just themselves, but they are acting as agents of change for their society and the country and the world in which they live. Because we're living in a connected world. You know, what's going on in the US right now? Look at Black Lives Matter in the US. It wasn't a US issue. It then spread to the whole world. And young people of all race groups and ethnicities came together to say, enough, no more. So we're starting to see a collapse happening of those traditional ways of looking at leadership. Let's put it bluntly. The traditional way of hierarchical leadership has no place in this current scenario, or in times of crisis, or in the new normal, or the future normal. What we're going to look for is not leadership by age, or because I've got the experience and I've got the scars. We're going to look for leaders with conviction, leaders who are prepared to work collaboratively. Ultimately, the leaders got to take account. And I think this generation of women are not going to fall back and say, I no longer have control. Another good author friend of mine, Rania Anderson, in her book Undeterred, said, this is the time. This is your time. Throughout history, there have been periods of time that have been advantageous for specific groups of people. And if you're a woman of working age in a growth economy, you are needed. And how spot on. We've seen examples of this around the world, from Greta Thunberg to the young activists in our country. Sadly, we've just heard Zenzi Mandela has just passed away, but there are examples of leadership. And talking about, I was thinking of Mom Grassa Michelle, and I was thinking of Winnie Mandela. You know, Winnie was vilified in the media. The role of media is so important. She was vilified. But there was a danger of a single story in that case, because where Winnie always said, I'm the president of people. And she lived and died for the cause. And I'm seeing a resurgence of that. I taught my MBA elective class a few days ago, Women in Leadership. By the way, both men and women took the class. But the young women sitting in that group, they have integrity, they are incredibly smart, so they have the qualifications, they have a strong value system, they have powerful relationships, and that is a winning combination. And they're technologically savvy. They are connected, they are plugged in. This is what the new world of leadership looks like.
This is really, really the new world. And as you've rightly mentioned, it's all about conviction. I think that's what the world needs more and more, because the last 40 years, if you look around politically speaking, I think, you know, a lot of societies are getting tired with the current leadership or previous leaderships. You know, it's been pretty much the same old same. And I agree with you. Even in Mauritius, for example, you know, we're talking more about conviction these days. Yeah, conviction about that you're going to do good for the country, that you mean business. Exactly what we've seen from women leaders in New Zealand and Finland, etc. And Germany. Merkel is a classic example, for example. You know, Shireen, great to have you. Was interesting to obviously listen to your presentation, and also somebody who's got strong conviction. And I can hear the passion about this. And I hope in the next 5 or 10 years, a lot of societies, especially in emerging markets, because, you know, we've also got cultural differences as well, you know, which plays against, which prevents women from being in the front line eventually. I hope there's going to be positive changes, and we need to keep pushing for that agenda, you know. And Shireen, last words from you. I mean, what's the new normal business-wise for you?
Yeah, the new normal business-wise, by the grace of God, I've been so busy, both at corporate level, individual level. People are struggling, Kevin, I mean, just the bottom line is, this is so unusual. People are struggling, and that is why I started with that mindfulness practice. Mental wellness is a big issue. And right now, we need to help people who are most vulnerable to surface. And you know, my work, while I'm working with corporates, I'm also mindful that I'm working with individuals
Absolutely.
who need help. And so it's been a privilege for me to be able to do that. It's a privilege for me to talk to you about the work I do. Thank you very much. Great
to have you, Shireen, and would love to connect you with, and you are already through Roots Advisory, obviously, with Mauritius, because they're in Mauritius as well. We're trying to push the, you know, the fact that we need to have sort of gender parity and equality, etc., because we're lagging big time in Mauritius. So
yeah,
would love to obviously get you one of these days in Mauritius to one of the conferences. You know, hopefully, most likely it's going to be next year. But Shireen, great to have you. Thanks a lot.
Kevin, before I go, I have to say something. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm doing a lot of work in Mauritius, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm working with the KIP Institute in Mauritius, doing a lot of women leadership programs, and I've been doing that for the last 5 years. They're doing phenomenal work about making sure the next leadership pipeline, women leadership pipeline, is strong. And I've worked with some of the corporates in Mauritius around this as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to be in Mauritius very soon.
So hope to see you again in the near future in Mauritius.
Yeah, I'm missing Mauritius right now.
Thanks a lot, Shireen. And
thank you.
Take care and keep well and keep safe. Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.